When she saw her ex-boyfriend at the bus station, filthy and holding a child, she rushed after him, but she never imagined what he was hiding. Joanna Matthews stood at the bustling intersection, her stilettos clicking impatiently against the pavement as she waited for the light to change. The crisp autumn air nipped at her cheeks, but she barely noticed, too preoccupied with the day ahead. At 32, Joanna had it all figured out, or so she thought. Her tailored navy suit and sleek briefcase spoke volumes about her successful career as a corporate lawyer. As she strode purposefully across the street, Joanna's phone buzzed. Another email from a demanding client. She sighed, her manicured fingers flying across the screen as she crafted a quick response. This was her life now, always on, always moving, always in control. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted from a nearby cafe, tempting her. Joanna checked her watch. She had time for a quick latte before her morning meeting. As she waited in line, her mind wandered to the mountain of work waiting for her at the office. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't hear the barista call her name. "Thanks," Joanna muttered, grabbing her drink and heading back out into the bustling city. She took a sip, savoring the rich flavor. It was one of the few indulgences she allowed herself these days. As she neared her office building, Joanna caught a glimpse of her reflection in a shop window. She looked polished, professional, exactly the image she worked so hard to maintain. But for a fleeting moment, she wondered if this was all there was to life. Joanna shook off the thought as quickly as it had come. She had worked too hard to get where she was to start doubting herself now. Her heels echoed in the marble lobby as she made her way to the elevator, nodding curtly at familiar faces. "Morning, Joanna," her assistant chirped as she breezed into her corner office. "Your 9 a.m. is already waiting in the conference room." Joanna suppressed a groan. She'd forgotten about the early meeting. "Thanks, Jess. Can you grab me the Donovan file?" As she settled behind her desk, Joanna's eyes fell on a framed photo tucked away in the corner. It was from years ago. Her smiling broadly, arms wrapped around a tall, handsome man with kind eyes. Michael, her ex. For a moment, Joanna allowed herself to remember. They had been so happy once, full of dreams and plans for the future. But life had gotten in the way, or rather, her ambition had. Joanna had chosen her career over their relationship, and Michael, well, he had made his choice too. The sharp ring of her office phone snapped Joanna back to reality. She quickly turned the photo face down and picked up the receiver. Joanna Matthews speaking. As she listened to the client on the other end, Joanna's professional mask slipped back into place. This was her world now. Deadlines, negotiations, and the constant pursuit of success. She had everything she'd ever wanted. So why did she feel so empty? The day flew by in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Before Joanna knew it, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across her office. She glanced at her watch, 7:30 p.m. Another late night. As she packed up her things, Joanna's gaze fell once again on the face-down photo. With a sudden pang of nostalgia, she picked it up, studying Michael's smiling face. Where was he now? Was he happy? Had he found someone who could give him what she couldn't? Joanna shook her head, annoyed at herself for this unexpected trip down memory lane. She tucked the photo into her desk drawer, out of sight. The past was the past. She had a life to live, a career to nurture. As she rode the elevator down to the lobby, Joanna mentally reviewed her to-do list for tomorrow. Another day, another dollar. That's what her father always used to say. She stepped out into the cool evening air, hailing a taxi with practiced ease. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked. Joanna hesitated for a moment. Home to her empty apartment, or maybe a quick drink with colleagues. In the end, she gave the driver her home address. A quiet night in sounded perfect. As the taxi wove through the city streets, Joanna leaned her head against the window, watching the world go by. She had everything she'd ever wanted, so why couldn't she shake the feeling that something was missing? The next morning, Joanna woke to the insistent beeping of her alarm. She groaned, fumbling for her phone on the nightstand. 6 a.m. Another day, another race against time. As she went through her morning routine, Joanna couldn't shake the lingering unease from the night before. She tossed and turned, dreams filled with fragments of her past. Michael's laugh, the warmth of his embrace, the hurt in his eyes when she'd chosen her career over him. "Get it together, Joanna," she muttered to her reflection as she applied her makeup. She had a big presentation today. There was no room for distractions. An hour later, Joanna was power walking towards the bus station. Her car was in the shop and she decided to take public transport rather than deal with the hassle of a taxi during rush hour. The station was crowded, a sea of commuters all rushing to their destinations. As Joanna navigated through the throng, her eyes caught on a figure huddled near one of the benches. A man in tattered clothes, his head bowed, a small child cradled in his arms. Her heart clenched at the sight. She was about to look away when something made her pause. There was something familiar about the curve of his shoulders, the way he held himself, even in defeat. Joanna found herself moving closer, drawn by an inexplicable force. The man lifted his head, and Joanna's world tilted on its axis. "Michael?" The name escaped her lips in a shocked whisper. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, time stood still. It was him. Older, worn, a shadow of the man she once knew, but undeniably, Michael. Recognition flickered in his gaze, followed quickly by shame. He clutched the child closer and stumbled to his feet. "Michael, wait!" Joanna called, but he was already moving, pushing through the crowd with surprising agility. Without thinking, Joanna gave chase. Her heels clacked against the pavement as she weaved through startled commuters. She could see Michael just ahead, his ragged jacket a beacon in the crowd. "Michael, please!" she called out again. "I just want to talk." He glanced back, fear evident in his eyes, and picked up his pace. The child in his arms began to cry, a high-pitched wail that cut through the bustle of the station. Joanna's mind raced as she ran. How had this happened? The Michael she knew had been successful, ambitious, not unlike herself. What could have brought him so low? And the child, whose was it? She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice when Michael suddenly ducked into a narrow alley between two buildings. Joanna skidded to a stop at the entrance, her heart pounding. "Michael," she said softly, trying to catch her breath. "Please, I'm not here to hurt you. I want to understand." For a long moment, there was silence. Then from the shadows, Michael's voice emerged, rough and weary. "What's there to understand, Joanna? Life happened. I fell. End of story." Joanna took a cautious step into the alley. "It doesn't have to be. Let me help you." A bitter laugh. "Help me? Like you did 5 years ago?" The words stung, but Joanna pressed on. "I know I hurt you. I made mistakes. But seeing you like this... Michael, please, talk to me." Slowly, Michael emerged from the shadows. In the dim light of the alley, Joanna could see the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the defeat in his posture. The child in his arms had quieted, little fingers curled into his tattered shirt. "You want to talk?" Michael said, his voice low. "Fine, but not here. Not like this." Joanna nodded, relief washing over her. "Of course, we can go wherever you're comfortable. My treat." Michael hesitated, then gave a short nod. "There's a diner around the corner. We can talk there." As they walked out of the alley, Joanna's mind whirled with questions. What had happened to the man she once loved? And how was she going to explain missing her big presentation? But as she glanced at Michael, at the protective way he held the child, she knew she'd made the right choice. Some things were more important than work. It was a lesson she wished she'd learned years ago. The diner loomed ahead, a neon sign flickering in the morning light. As they approached the entrance, Joanna took a deep breath. She had a feeling that whatever Michael was about to tell her would change everything. But for the first time in years, she was ready to listen. The bell above the diner door jingled as Joanna and Michael stepped inside. The aroma of coffee and bacon filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension between them. Joanna led the way to a booth in the corner, away from prying eyes. As they settled into their seats, the child in Michael's arms stirred, blinking sleepily. Joanna couldn't help but notice the girl's striking blue eyes, eyes that seemed oddly familiar. A waitress approached, her smile faltering slightly as she took in Michael's disheveled appearance. "What can I get for you folks?" "Coffee, please," Joanna said. "And, Michael, are you hungry?" He hesitated before nodding. "Pancakes for me and the little one, if that's all right." Joanna added her own order, and the waitress left, casting a curious glance over her shoulder. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Joanna's eyes darted between Michael and the child, her mind racing with questions. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. "Michael, what happened? The last I heard, you were doing well at your firm. And now," she gestured vaguely, unable to find the right words. Michael's jaw tightened. He looked down at the child in his arms, gently smoothing her tangled hair. "Life has a way of throwing curveballs, Joanna. You of all people should know that." The bitterness in his voice made Joanna flinch. "I know I hurt you when we broke up, but this seems like more than just a bad breakup." Michael let out a humorless laugh. "You think this is about us? Joanna, the world doesn't revolve around you and your choices." Before Joanna could respond, the waitress returned with their drinks and food. As she set down the plates, the little girl perked up, her eyes widening at the sight of the pancakes. "Thank you," Michael murmured, helping the child sit up. He began cutting the pancakes into small, manageable pieces. Joanna watched the interaction, her heart twisting. Is she yours?" Michael froze for a moment before resuming his task. "In a way," he said softly. "Her name's Emma. She's my responsibility now." Joanna's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, in a way?" "Michael, please, I want to understand." He sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "It's complicated, Joanna, and not a story for little ears." He nodded towards Emma, who was happily munching on her pancakes, oblivious to the tension around her. Joanna nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. She noticed Michael's hands shaking slightly as he raised his own cup to his lips. "When was the last time you had a proper meal?" she asked gently. Michael's eyes flashed with a mix of shame and defiance. "We manage." "Michael?" Joanna reached across the table, hesitating before placing her hand on his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. "Whatever happened, whatever you're going through, you don't have to do it alone." For a moment, the hardness in Michael's eyes softened. Joanna caught a glimpse of the man she used to know, kind, vulnerable, full of dreams. But then the walls came back up. "Why do you care, Joanna? You made it clear years ago that your career was more important than anything else. Why should now be any different?" The words stung, but Joanna knew she deserved them. "People change, Michael. I've changed. Seeing you today, it's made me realize how much I've been missing, how much I've been hiding from." Michael studied her face as if searching for any sign of insincerity. Emma, having finished her pancakes, tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Mike, I'm sleepy," she mumbled. Joanna's eyebrows shot up. "Uncle Mike?" Michael tensed, realizing his slip. He pulled Emma closer, protective. "Like I said, it's complicated." Joanna's mind raced. If Michael was Emma's uncle, then... A sudden, terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. But it couldn't be. Could it? "Michael," she said slowly, "who are Emma's parents?" The look on Michael's face, a mix of pain, guilt, and resignation, told Joanna everything she needed to know. Her world tilted on its axis for the second time that day. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's Lisa, isn't it? My sister." Michael nodded, his eyes never leaving Emma's sleepy face. There's a lot you don't know, Joanna. A lot that happened after you left. Joanna felt as if she couldn't breathe. Her sister, Michael, Emma. How had everything gotten so tangled? "Tell me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Michael. I need to know everything." Michael looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," he said softly, "but you might not like what you hear." As Michael began to speak, Joanna braced herself. She had a feeling that the story he was about to tell would change everything. She thought she knew about her past, her family, and the man she had once loved. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on Emma's sleeping form. "It started about a year after we broke up," he began, his voice low. "I was struggling, trying to fill the void you left. I threw myself into work, stayed late at the office most nights." Joanna nodded, remembering her own coping mechanisms after their split. She'd done much the same, burying herself in case files and client meetings. "One night," Michael continued, "I was working late and Lisa showed up at the office. She said she was in town for a conference and wanted to catch up. I didn't think much of it at the time. She was your sister, after all. It felt safe." Joanna's stomach churned. She had a feeling she knew where this was going, but she remained silent, letting Michael tell his story. "We went out for drinks, talked about old times, about you. Lisa seemed to understand what I was going through. One thing led to another and—" Michael trailed off, his face a mask of regret. "You slept together," Joanna finished for him, her voice flat. Michael nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "It was a mistake. We both knew it immediately. I felt guilty, ashamed. I told Lisa it could never happen again." "But it did," Joanna guessed. "No," Michael said firmly. "That was the only time. But a few weeks later, Lisa called me. She was pregnant." Joanna gasped softly, her eyes darting to Emma. The little girl stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. "I was shocked, terrified," Michael continued. "But I told Lisa I'd support her, whatever she decided. She said she wanted to keep the baby. I thought we could make it work somehow." Joanna's mind was reeling. Her sister and her ex-boyfriend. A child. How had she not known any of this? "What happened next?" she asked, dreading the answer. Michael's face darkened. "Lisa, she changed, started making demands, said she'd tell everyone about our night together if I didn't give her money. Lots of money. Blackmail," Joanna whispered, horrified. Michael nodded. "At first I paid. I was scared of the scandal, of losing my job, but the demands kept coming. I drained my savings, took out loans. Eventually I couldn't keep up. I lost my job, my apartment, everything." Joanna felt sick. This wasn't the sister she thought she knew. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you fight back?" "I was ashamed," Michael admitted. "And I wanted to protect Emma. She didn't ask for any of this. I thought, if I just gave Lisa what she wanted, maybe she'd let me be a part of Emma's life." "But something changed," Joanna prompted gently. Michael's eyes filled with tears. 6 months ago, Lisa overdosed. The money, she'd been using it to fuel a drug habit. I had no idea. Child Services called me. As Emma's father, I was next of kin." Joanna reached across the table, taking Michael's hand. This time he didn't pull away. "I took Emma in," he continued, "but by then I had nothing left. No job, no home. We've been on the streets ever since, just trying to survive." The weight of Michael's story hung heavy in the air. Joanna's mind was spinning, trying to reconcile this new reality with everything she thought she knew. "Why didn't you reach out to me?" she asked softly. Michael laughed bitterly. "And say what, Joanna? Hey, I know we haven't spoken in years, but I had an affair with your sister and now I'm homeless with her child? Would you have even believed me?" Joanna winced at the harshness of his words, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm here now, and I want to help." Michael studied her face as if searching for any sign of deception. "Why?" he asked finally. "After everything that's happened, why would you want to get involved in this mess?" Joanna took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "Because despite everything, I still care about you, Michael. And Emma, she's my niece, my family. I can't turn my back on that." For the first time since they'd entered the diner, a flicker of hope appeared in Michael's eyes. "What are you saying, Joanna?" "I'm saying," Joanna replied, squeezing his hand, "that you're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together, for Emma's sake and for ours." As the words left her mouth, Joanna realized the truth in them. Her perfectly ordered life had been turned upside down in the span of a morning, but somehow it felt right. She had a chance to make things right, to be there for the family she'd neglected for so long. Michael's eyes welled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. As they sat there, hands clasped across the table, Joanna knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, difficult conversations, and hard decisions to make. But looking at Michael and Emma, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The next few days passed in a whirlwind for Joanna. After their emotional conversation at the diner, she had insisted on getting Michael and Emma off the streets. They were now staying in a modest hotel room, paid for with Joanna's credit card. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. Joanna stood outside the hotel room door, her hand poised to knock. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The past few days had been a roller coaster of emotions, and she knew there was still a long road ahead. She knocked softly, mindful of waking Emma if she was napping. The door opened, revealing Michael. He looked better than he had at the bus station, clean-shaven, wearing fresh clothes Joanna had bought for him. But the wariness in his eyes remained. "Hey," Joanna said, offering a small smile. "I brought some groceries." She held up the bags in her hands. Michael stepped aside to let her in. "Thanks," he murmured. "You didn't have to do that." Joanna set the bags on the small kitchenette counter. "I wanted to," she replied. "How's Emma doing?" As if on cue, a small voice piped up from the other room. "Uncle Mike." "Who's there?" Emma appeared in the doorway, her blue eyes wide with curiosity. She was wearing a new dress, another of Joanna's purchases, and her hair was neatly braided. "Hi, Emma," Joanna said gently. "Do you remember me?" "I'm Joanna." Emma nodded shyly. "You bought me the pretty dress," she said, twirling a little. Joanna's heart melted at the sight. "That's right, and I brought some yummy food for you and Uncle Mike. Would you like to help me unpack it?" Emma's face lit up, and she nodded eagerly. As they began unpacking the groceries, Joanna couldn't help but marvel at how quickly the little girl had wormed her way into her heart. Michael watched them from the sidelines, his expression a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Joanna," he said softly, "we need to talk about what happens next." Joanna nodded, turning to Emma. "Sweetie, why don't you go watch some cartoons while Uncle Mike and I chat?" Once Emma was settled in front of the TV, Joanna and Michael sat at the small table in the kitchenette. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done," Michael began. "But we can't keep living in a hotel room, and I need to find a job, get back on my feet." Joanna leaned forward, her face serious. "I've been thinking about that. I have a proposition for you." Michael raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "My firm has been looking for a new paralegal," Joanna explained. "The hours are flexible and the pay is decent. It's not what you're used to, but it could be a fresh start." Michael's eyes widened in surprise. "Joanna, I don't know what to say. Are you sure? After everything that's happened?" Joanna reached across the table, taking his hand. "Michael, I know we have a complicated history, but you're a good person who's been dealt a bad hand. You deserve a chance to rebuild your life, for yourself and for Emma." Michael's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And what about Emma?" I can't afford childcare, and I don't want to leave her alone. I've thought about that too, Joanna said. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, runs a small daycare from her home. I've already spoken to her, and she's willing to take Emma at a discounted rate. For a moment, Michael was silent, overwhelmed by Joanna's generosity. Why are you doing all this? He asked finally. Joanna took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. Because I realize now that I made a mistake all those years ago. I chose my career over everything else, and I lost sight of what really matters. Family, love, compassion. I want to make things right, Michael. Not just for you and Emma, but for myself too. Michael squeezed her hand, a small smile tugging at his lips. You've changed, he said softly. Joanna returned the smile. I'm trying to. So what do you say? Are you willing to give this a shot? Michael glanced over at Emma, who was giggling at something on the TV. When he turned back to Joanna, there was determination in his eyes. Yes, he said. For Emma's sake and for us, I'm willing to try. As they sat there, hands clasped across the table, Joanna felt a warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still many hurdles to overcome, many conversations to be had. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Uncle Mike! Joanna! Emma called from the other room. Come watch with me. Michael and Joanna exchanged a look, both chuckling softly. As they rose to join Emma, Joanna knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in all their lives. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real. And that was worth more than any career success she'd ever achieved. 2 weeks had passed since Joanna's life-altering encounter at the bus station. The rhythm of her days had shifted dramatically, now revolving around not just her work, but also Michael and Emma's needs. Today marked Michael's first day at the law firm, and Joanna found herself more nervous than she'd been for any big case in recent memory. She stood in the elevator, smoothing down her suit jacket for the umpteenth time. The doors dinged open, revealing the bustling office floor. Joanna took a deep breath and stepped out, her eyes immediately searching for Michael. She spotted him near the reception desk, looking smart in the new suit she'd helped him pick out. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard. If it weren't for the slight nervousness in his posture, no one would guess the hardships he'd endured just weeks ago. Michael, Joanna called, approaching him with a warm smile. How's it going so far? He turned, relief washing over his face at the sight of her. Joanna, hey, it's overwhelming, to be honest. But good. Everyone's been very welcoming. Joanna nodded, understanding the mix of emotions he must be feeling. That's great to hear. Listen, I know you're probably swamped with orientation stuff, but I was wondering if you'd like to grab lunch later. My treat. Michael hesitated for a moment before nodding. That'd be nice, thanks. I'd like to talk to you about something anyway. Before Joanna could inquire further, her assistant appeared at her elbow. Ms. Matthews, your 10 o'clock is waiting in the conference room. Joanna sighed, duty calling. I'll see you at lunch then, Michael. Good luck with everything. As she walked away, Joanna couldn't help but feel a twinge of worry. What did Michael want to talk about? Had he changed his mind about the job? About her help? The morning flew by in a flurry of meetings and phone calls. Before she knew it, it was time for her lunch with Michael. They met in the lobby, deciding to walk to a nearby cafe. Once they were seated with their sandwiches, Joanna couldn't hold back any longer. So, what did you want to talk about? Michael took a deep breath, setting down his sandwich. It's about Emma, he began. I dropped her off at Mrs. Chen's this morning and... Joanna, she cried. She didn't want me to leave her. Joanna's heart clenched. Oh, Michael, that must have been hard. He nodded, his eyes clouded with worry. It was, and it got me thinking, are we doing the right thing? Is all this change too much for her? Joanna reached across the table, placing her hand on his. Change is always difficult, especially for children. But Emma is resilient, and she has you. Give it time. Michael sighed, turning his hand to clasp hers. I hope you're right. It's just, I feel like I'm failing her somehow. Like I should be able to provide for her on my own. Michael, Joanna said firmly, you're not failing her. You're doing everything you can to give her a better life. That's what matters. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Thanks, Joanna. I don't know what we'd do without you. As they finished their lunch, the conversation turned to lighter topics. Michael's impressions of their co-workers, the intricacies of the filing system he was learning. Joanna found herself laughing more than she had in years. As they walked back to the office, Joanna felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This, helping Michael, being there for Emma, felt right in a way her solitary pursuit of career success never had. Oh, Michael said suddenly, stopping in his tracks. I almost forgot. Emma asked about you this morning. Joanna's eyebrows rose in surprise. She did? Michael nodded, a soft smile on his face. She wanted to know if Aunt Joanna was coming over again soon. I think she's grown quite fond of you. Joanna felt a lump form in her throat. Aunt Joanna, she repeated softly. I'd like that. To be there for her, I mean. Michael studied her face for a moment. You know, Joanna, you've changed so much. The Joanna I knew 5 years ago, she wouldn't have done any of this. Joanna felt a pang of regret at his words, but she knew they were true. I'm trying to be better, she said softly, to remember what's really important. As they reached the office building, Michael turned to her. Thank you, Joanna, for everything. I know this situation is complicated, but I'm glad you're here. Joanna smiled, feeling a flutter in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. So am I, Michael. So am I. As they rode the elevator back up to their floor, Joanna realized that for the first time in a long time, she was excited about what the future might hold. There were still challenges ahead, still wounds to heal and trust to rebuild. But with Michael and Emma in her life, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. As weeks turned into months, a new routine began to take shape in Joanna's life. Her days were no longer solely defined by case files and client meetings, but by school runs, family dinners, and weekend outings with Michael and Emma. The change was both exhilarating and terrifying. On this particular Saturday morning, Joanna found herself in the kitchen of her apartment, attempting to make pancakes. Emma sat at the counter, her legs swinging as she watched with wide-eyed fascination. Are they ready yet, Aunt Joanna? Emma asked, her voice tinged with impatience and excitement. Joanna chuckled, flipping a slightly misshapen pancake. Almost, sweetie. Why don't you go wake up Uncle Mike? He's been sleeping in far too long. As Emma scampered off to the guest room where Michael was staying, Joanna took a moment to reflect on how much her life had changed. Her once pristine apartment now bore signs of a child's presence. Colorful drawings on the fridge, a stuffed animal peeking out from behind the couch, tiny shoes by the door. The sound of laughter drew her attention back to the present. Michael emerged from the guest room, Emma perched on his shoulders, both of them grinning widely. Something smells good, Michael said, setting Emma down gently. I didn't know you could cook, Joanna. Joanna raised an eyebrow, gesturing to the stack of slightly burnt pancakes. I'm not sure this qualifies as cooking, but I'm trying. Michael's smile softened as he approached her. Hey, it's the thought that counts, and I'm sure they taste great. Right, Emma? Emma nodded enthusiastically, already reaching for a pancake. Can we put chocolate chips in the next ones, Aunt Joanna? Sure thing, sweetheart, Joanna replied, her heart warming at the domesticity of the scene. As they sat down to eat, Joanna couldn't help but marvel at how natural it all felt. Michael and Emma had seamlessly integrated into her life, filling a void she hadn't even realized was there. So, Michael said between bites, what's the plan for today? Joanna wiped a smear of syrup from Emma's chin before answering. I was thinking we could go to the park. Emma's been asking to feed the ducks, and it's a beautiful day out. Emma clapped her hands excitedly. Can we get ice cream too? Michael and Joanna exchanged a look, both trying to hide their amusement. "We'll see," Michael said, ruffling Emma's hair affectionately. As they cleared the table and got ready for their outing, Joanna felt a familiar pang of guilt. She hadn't told her parents about Michael and Emma yet. How could she explain the complex situation without dredging up painful family history? "Hey!" Michael's voice broke through her thoughts. He was standing in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "You okay?" "You seemed lost in thought there." Joanna forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking about work stuff." Michael didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. "You know you can talk to me, right? About anything." Joanna nodded, touched by his concern. "I know. Thank you, Michael." As they walked to the park, Emma between them holding both their hands, Joanna couldn't shake the feeling that she was living on borrowed time. Sooner or later, she'd have to confront the reality of their situation, the complicated history, the unresolved feelings, the uncertain future. At the park, Joanna watched as Michael taught Emma how to throw bread to the ducks, both of them laughing as the birds squabbled over the treats. The scene was picture perfect, like something out of a dream she never knew she had. "Aunt Joanna," Emma called, waving her over. "Come see the baby ducks." As Joanna joined them by the pond, Michael's hand brushed against hers. The touch sent a jolt through her, a reminder of feelings she'd tried to bury long ago. "This is nice," Michael said softly, his eyes on Emma, but his words clearly meant for Joanna. "I can't remember the last time I felt this content." Joanna's heart raced. She wanted to tell him how she felt, how seeing him with Emma made her wonder about what could have been, what still could be. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded. "It is nice," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. As the afternoon wore on, filled with ice cream cones and playground adventures, Joanna found herself both thrilled and terrified by the domestic bliss she was experiencing. She knew that soon she'd have to make some difficult decisions about her family, about her feelings for Michael, about what kind of future she wanted for herself. But for now, watching Emma's delighted face as she swung higher and higher, Michael's steady hand on the little girl's back, Joanna allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Today, she had this, a taste of the family she'd always secretly longed for. As they walked home, Emma's tired head resting on Michael's shoulder, Joanna made a silent promise to herself. Whatever came next, she would face it head on, for Emma's sake, for Michael's, and for her own. The following Wednesday evening found Joanna pacing nervously in her living room. She had finally mustered the courage to invite her parents over for dinner, intending to tell them about Michael and Emma. The weight of the impending conversation sat heavily on her shoulders. A soft knock on the doorframe made her turn. Michael stood there, concern etched on his face. "Hey," he said gently, "you've been pacing for the last 20 minutes. Are you sure you want to do this tonight?" Joanna took a deep breath, smoothing down her blouse. "I have to, Michael. They deserve to know, and I can't keep living this double life." Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. He stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "Whatever happens, Emma and I are here for you. You know that, right?" The warmth of his touch and the sincerity in his voice made Joanna's heart flutter. She was about to respond when Emma's voice piped up from the kitchen. "Aunt Joanna, the timer's beeping!" Grateful for the distraction, Joanna hurried to the kitchen to check on the roast she'd prepared. As she basted the meat, she could hear Michael and Emma setting the table, their quiet chatter a soothing backdrop to her frazzled nerves. Just as she was placing the roast on a serving platter, the doorbell rang. Joanna froze, her heart pounding. "I've got it," Michael called out, his voice steady and reassuring. Joanna heard the door open, followed by her mother's surprised exclamation. "Michael, what on earth are you doing here?" Taking a deep breath, Joanna stepped out of the kitchen. Her parents stood in the entryway, confusion evident on their faces as they looked between Michael and their daughter. "Mom, Dad," Joanna began, her voice only slightly shaky. "I'm glad you could make it. There's There's something I need to tell you." Over the next hour, as they sat around the dining table, Joanna explained everything. Her chance encounter with Michael, the truth about Emma, and how they had all come to be living this new life together. She watched as shock, disbelief, and finally a mix of sadness and understanding passed over her parents' faces. "Oh, Joanna," her mother said softly, reaching across the table to grasp her daughter's hand. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Joanna felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I didn't know how. I was afraid of how you'd react, of dredging up old pain about Lisa." Her father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "We're your parents, Joanna. We're here for you, no matter what. And Emma, she's our granddaughter. We would never turn our backs on family." At the mention of her name, Emma looked up from her plate, her blue eyes wide. "Are you my grandma and grandpa?" she asked innocently. The tension in the room seemed to dissolve at the little girl's words. Joanna's mother's eyes welled with tears as she nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." As the evening progressed, Joanna felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She watched as her father taught Emma a silly hand game, and her mother fussed over Michael, insisting he looked too thin. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, questions left unasked, but it was a start. Later, as Joanna was clearing the dishes, her mother joined her in the kitchen. "Joanna," she said softly, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. What you're doing for Michael and Emma, it's not easy, but it's the right thing." Joanna felt a lump form in her throat. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." Her mother hesitated for a moment before continuing. "And Michael, I see the way you look at him. Are you too?" Joanna shook her head quickly. "No, it's not like that. We're just figuring things out." Her mother gave her a knowing smile. "Well, whatever happens, we're here for you, all of you." As Joanna hugged her mother goodbye at the end of the night, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. There were still challenges ahead. Emma's upcoming school enrollment, the lingering questions about her feelings for Michael. But for now, she felt like she could breathe easier. Once her parents had left, Joanna joined Michael and Emma on the couch. Emma was already half asleep, curled up against Michael's side. He looked up at Joanna, a soft smile on his face. "That went well," he said quietly. Joanna nodded, settling in on Emma's other side. "It did. Thank you for being here." As they sat there, the three of them together, Joanna realized that this makeshift family they'd created felt more like home than anything she'd known before. Whatever the future held, she knew they'd face it together. The crisp autumn air nipped at Joanna's cheeks as she stood outside Emma's new school. It was the little girl's first day of kindergarten, and Joanna's stomach was a knot of nerves and excitement. Beside her, Michael knelt down, adjusting Emma's backpack straps. "Remember, sweetheart," he said softly, "Aunt Joanna will pick you up after school, and if you need anything, your teacher has our numbers." Emma nodded solemnly, her blue eyes wide with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "Will you and Aunt Joanna be here when school's over?" Joanna knelt down next to Michael, her heart melting at Emma's question. "Of course we will, sweetie. We wouldn't miss it for the world." As the school bell rang, Emma gave them both quick hugs before scampering off to join her classmates. Joanna and Michael stood, watching until she disappeared into the building. "She'll be fine," Michael said, more to himself than to Joanna. "She's a strong kid." Joanna nodded, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "She is, and she has us." As they walked back to Joanna's car, a comfortable silence fell between them. The past few months had been a whirlwind of change. Michael had settled into his job at the law firm. Emma had grown more confident and outgoing. And Joanna had found a sense of purpose she never knew she was missing. "Joanna," Michael said as they reached the car, his tone serious. "There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." Joanna's heart skipped a beat. "Oh? What is it?" Michael took a deep breath. I've been looking at apartments. I think it might be time for Emma and me to move out of your place." Joanna felt as if the ground had dropped out from under her. "Oh," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. "I see. Is something wrong?" Michael shook his head quickly. No, it's just, you've done so much for us, Joanna. More than I could ever repay. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." Joanna leaned against the car, processing his words. The thought of her apartment without Emma's laughter, without Michael's quiet presence in the evenings, felt wrong somehow. "Michael," she said softly, "you and Emma, you're not taking advantage. Having you there, it's..." She trailed off, unsure how to express the fullness in her heart. Michael stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "It's what, Joanna?" She took a deep breath, knowing it was time to be honest, with Michael and with herself. "It's everything I never knew I wanted. You, Emma, the three of us together. It feels right." Michael's expression softened, a mix of hope and uncertainty in his eyes. "Joanna, I've been feeling the same way, but I didn't want to assume, to complicate things." Joanna reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Things are already complicated, Michael, but that doesn't mean they're not worth it." For a moment they stood there, hands clasped, the weight of unspoken feelings between them. Then slowly, Michael leaned in. Joanna met him halfway, their lips meeting in a soft, tentative kiss. When they pulled apart, Joanna couldn't help but laugh softly. "We've come a long way from that day at the bus station, haven't we?" Michael chuckled, his forehead resting against hers. "We certainly have. So what now?" Joanna squeezed his hand. "Now, we take it one day at a time, together." As they drove to work, Joanna's mind raced with possibilities. There were still challenges ahead, explaining their relationship to Emma, navigating the complexities of their shared past. But for the first time in years, Joanna felt truly hopeful about the future. That evening, as the three of them sat around the dinner table, Emma regaling them with stories from her first day of school, Joanna caught Michael's eye. The warmth in his gaze, the soft smile on his lips made her heart swell. "Aunt Joanna," Emma said, pulling Joanna's attention back to her, "can we have ice cream for dessert?" Joanna laughed, reaching out to ruffle Emma's hair. "Sure, sweetie. I think we have something to celebrate today." As Michael went to fetch the ice cream, Joanna took in the scene before her. The colorful drawings on the fridge, Emma's school books on the counter, Michael's briefcase by the door. This was her family now, unexpected and imperfect, but more precious than she could have ever imagined. Later, as they tucked Emma into bed, the little girl sleepily asked, "Are we always going to be together like this?" Joanna and Michael exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. "We'll do our best, sweetheart," Michael said softly. As they closed Emma's bedroom door, Joanna felt Michael's arm slip around her waist. She leaned into him, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Michael asked. Joanna smiled, thinking of the long, winding path that had led them here. "For giving me a second chance, for helping me find what really matters." Michael pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "We found it together," he murmured. As they settled on the couch, talking softly about their plans for the weekend, Joanna knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was better than anything she could have dreamed. 2 years had passed since that fateful day at the bus station, and Joanna found herself standing in the backyard of her new home, surrounded by friends and family. The air was filled with laughter and the delicious aroma of barbecue as they celebrated Emma's 7th birthday. Joanna watched as Emma, now taller and more confident, chased after her cousins in a game of tag. The sight filled her heart with joy and a sense of completeness she never thought possible. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Michael's voice came from behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. Joanna leaned back into his embrace, a content smile on her face. Just thinking about how far we've come, how different life was 2 years ago. Michael nodded, his chin resting on her shoulder. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? Their relationship had blossomed over the past 2 years, growing stronger with each challenge they faced together. They had moved into this house 6 months ago, a symbol of their commitment to building a life together. "Mommy! Daddy!" Emma's voice rang out across the yard. "Come see what Grandpa taught me." Joanna's heart swelled at Emma's words. It had taken time and patience, but Emma had eventually started calling them Mom and Dad. It was a transition that had brought tears to all their eyes. As they walked hand in hand to where Emma was showing off a magic trick to her grandparents, Joanna caught sight of a framed photo on the patio table. It was a picture of Lisa, Emma's birth mother, and Joanna's sister. They had decided to keep Lisa's memory alive for Emma, sharing stories and photos, ensuring she knew about her biological mother while embracing her new family. "She would be proud," Michael whispered, noticing where Joanna's gaze had landed. "Of Emma, and of you." Joanna nodded, squeezing his hand. They had worked through their complicated history, finding forgiveness and understanding. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Joanna found herself in the kitchen with her mother, cleaning up. "You know," her mother said, a knowing smile on her face, "I always hoped you'd find this kind of happiness. I just never imagined it would happen quite like this." Joanna chuckled, placing a stack of plates in the dishwasher. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Later that night, after Emma had been tucked into bed, Joanna and Michael sat on the porch swing, enjoying the quiet evening. "I have something for you," Michael said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Joanna's breath caught in her throat. Inside was a beautiful engagement ring, simple yet elegant. "Joanna," Michael began, his voice filled with emotion, "these past 2 years have shown me what true love and family really mean. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy sprang to Joanna's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. As Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, she knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in their extraordinary journey. The path that had led them here had been unexpected and at times difficult, but it had brought them to where they were meant to be. Together, they had built a family founded on love, forgiveness, and second chances. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Joanna realized that sometimes life's greatest blessings come in the most unexpected packages. What had started as a chance encounter at a bus station had blossomed into a love story that would last a lifetime. And as the stars twinkled above them, Joanna knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, as a family. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.